I'm going to be talking from my own experience, both an experience working for the Office of Climate Change, but also as a part-time academic and as a member of my community and person who has been committed to doing sustainability, environmental conservation, and climate change action for most of my adult life. So let me start off with our title today was really talking about so this gloom and bloom. Everywhere I go, I tend to get a little bit of resistance to my talks because when I represent DEC in the Office of Climate Change, there's no way to present the science of climate and not to admit that we have some gloom. But I'm not a pessimist, and I don't think that it's very helpful for us to take a pessimistic approach. And so I've always said that we really take a gloom and bloom perspective on this. There's a whole lot about the science of ecosystems and about climate change that is relatively new to us. We didn't know what was going on for quite some time. And now we're finding that a lot of human impacts and human policy decisions and governance issues ultimately, come together and create a challenge for us. And now we've got to figure out some pathways towards solutions. And I do think the bloom part of that is that we have some fantastic science that we know now. There's some fantastic social science that we have now. And we have the capacity of institutions and of communities and of human beings and a next generation of very mobilized and visionary young people that are taking up the baton with us. A little bit about me before I begin so that you know where I come from. One of the things that we find about climate change communication science is that the audience will be looking for the credibility of the speaker in order for me to be valid. So let me tell you a little bit about myself. As I've shared, I am a climate policy analyst for the Department of Environmental Conservation. In that role, I am a section lead for the climate change adaptation and resilience section, which means I lead a team of folks who are looking at how we deal with the climate change impacts, adapt to those, and move beyond some of the kind of knee-jerk responses of just looking at from storm to storm or flood to flood or heat episode to heat wave, and just kind of do band-aids on the situation, but really looking long-term at finding solutions and sometimes transformative solutions that'll take us into the future. I also am a lecturer at the University of Albany. I teach in the Biodiversity, Conservation, and Policy program, and with a particular focus on natural resources and how natural resources can be both a solution to provide solutions for climate change issues and adaptation and resilience, but also the need to help for humans to help ecosystems to make that rapid transition that for some species and some ecosystems, some habitats, it's going to be very difficult for them to make the rapid transformation and the roles that we can play. I am also a homesteader and a goat farmer. So my wife and I are raising a family, and our family education is all completely wrapped up in what we do here as we try to figure out ways for us to live more sustainably and regenerative, for us to find ways to adapt with every other family, every other farmer, every other member of the community as these climate disruptions unfold. I'm also the founder of a nonprofit organization called the Anam Earth Center for Sustainability and Culture. And this is an endeavor a long time ago. I had encountered a pretty wise person who said, we'll all work our 9-to-5 jobs, and we have to figure out ways as Americans to also have a 5-to-9 job. And so my hobby is public policy, environmental policy. And so we created many, many years ago, a community-based nonprofit organization that focuses primarily on intergenerational sustainability and intergenerational equity, which means we work primarily with next generation, young families, young adults, and youth as a way of preparing them for the 21st century. and is a community-based, all voluntary organization at this point, and we engage a lot of other volunteers to work at the level of local policy and issues, initiatives, and education, and just preparing for skills and knowledge that they're going to need for the next generation. And as part of that, we have developed a game, which is a climate change and environmental game called EarthQuest. Because some of the greatest research that's out and available right now is about environmental education that allows young people or those who are being educated to actually simulate experiences as a great educational experience for them, and has some potential for changing behaviors to make them more sustainable and regenerative. We also have a local think tank called Anam Circle, and we engage recent graduate students who have a background in environmental policy and economic policy, and engage them in solving some real problems in our local area. And then we have our Glendara Homestead, which is our small goat farm and homestead. And we do all kinds of sustainability and regenerative experiences, restoring biodiversity and reducing our carbon footprint and our energy footprint, and finding ways to simplify our lives as families, to be responsible, citizens of the planet. And come up with some solutions, but working together in a network of other families and other communities to find ways, and then we share those best practices with one another. And a very informal network, but it is a very life-giving network, and people are very attracted to the work that we do and the opportunity to work together on this. In my past, I also ran youth conservation corps, which was the thing that for me helped me to really transition into an awareness of environmental conservation issues early on. And then using our youth conservation course, teaching and training young people the kind of basic hands-on skills of doing conservation, trail work, forest restoration, habitat restoration. But a lot of that was also focused on climate adaptation and responding to climate adaptation issues and resilience issues. And through that, we were able to engage in a whole lot of different policy issues that were integrated. So our conservation issues are very much deeply rooted in climate change issues and community economic issues, in equity issues, and poverty issues. And I work very closely with tribal communities, Hispanic communities, African-American communities and youth, families, both in the inner city and in rural areas. And that was both in the East Coast in New York and in the West Coast, primarily in Arizona. And so I come from a pretty extensive experience, both of education and really applied experiences in working with communities to address these issues together, and through formal institutions and informal institutions. So I started, I think if you looked at the summary you saw of the presentation today, I make a claim that our American democracy is not finished. And I think that's really key when we're looking at ways that we can address climate change in our communities. And you all know, I'm certain that you all know that generally for climate change policy, we look at two primary categories. One is under the mitigation category, and that's looking at reducing our greenhouse gases. Although we say reducing, really we're talking about for every possible emission, we're trying to eliminate those. So eliminating our carbon footprint as much as possible, and rather than just reducing it incrementally. So that's the effect that's going to, or that's the actions that's going to help us to really have an impact in the future climate change and the intensity over time. And so we need to do that. And then it's also the steps that we're going to be taking to live more sustainably and regeneratively. But the other arena is the arena of adaptation, and adaptation doesn't get as much talk time, because it was an assumption early on that if we started talking about adaptation, it would be like this sense of hopelessness that we had failed in our mitigation efforts to reduce greenhouse gases. But in my role, we don't cover over that. So the reality is, because we have known about the climate change issues and about greenhouse gas emissions for decades, particularly multinational corporations that contribute toward this in the fossil fuel arena, but others too. It has created a situation where if we actually reduced our emissions by tomorrow morning and we were at zero, and we congratulate ourselves, we're still going to have a gap of climate change where there's so much carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases in the atmosphere that we're going to have increases in our temperature through global warming, and we're going to have to adapt to that amount. And any strategy as we move forward is going to be not only eliminating our greenhouse gases, but also finding very creative ways of actually pulling out those greenhouse gases out of the atmosphere and sequestering those so that they're not contributing toward that problem. And we're going to have to do this. So it's really kind of an all above. We've got to reduce or eliminate our carbon emissions. We've got to find ways of extracting existing carbon out of the atmosphere. And then we are going to have to adapt to a climate changed world that is already here. And so when I say our democracy is not finished, it's because some of the fundamental challenges that we're finding in environmental issues that CACs deal with on a year in, year out basis, the fundamental challenges for living in a society that's not sustainable, and having tremendous environmental impacts, even at this point, are the same democracy challenges that we have for climate change. And yet, because because democracy is not finished, it means as we look forward to addressing climate change, we have an opportunity to use this climate change emergency to fulfill this American democracy vision. A key to doing that is going to be working across generations to prepare the next generations for the 21st century. And that 21st century doesn't look like the 20th century. And my big fear is that the education that we're providing young people is preparing them for a 21st century world that looks a whole lot like the 20th century world. And that's just not going to be the case. And as we focus on working with young people as the next generation to prepare them for the world that they're going to inherit, it's also about parents and grandparents taking responsibility for lifestyle changes and for getting engaged civically in the world and making personal decisions, but also community decisions that will be reflective of what they want their children, grandchildren to look at and to experience. And it also means that parents and grandparents today educating themselves and becoming aware and becoming very literate about these issues and what the implications are for the lifestyles that we're adopting today. It's, if we think about it, ultimately our children's future, our grandchildren's future is really going to depend on us doing the right thing today. And that means that our generation is really the bridge generation. We are a bridge generation because we are going to have to be the generation that figures out how to make that transition from that 20th century world to a 21st century world that is sustainable and regenerative. And then we'll take a look also today at what the science and the social science tells us, which is both, as I said, gloom and bloom, and the resources now that we have at our disposal to transition us to a sustainable, resilient, and regenerative world. And I'm going to share with you today, actually, a couple of images and some stories that are rooted in the science and the social science. We find that, of course, the human brain, if you didn't know this, the human brain is really deeply rooted and hardwired for narrative, for stories, and for storytelling. All cultures, as far as we can go back and trace this, have told stories through pictures and images they've left us, but through their material culture and then the oral traditions of passing on traditions of mythology. And those mythologies are most important for cultures and communities because it gives them the stories that tell them what's important to look at in the world that we live in, and what are the types of actions and lifestyles that we need to prioritize that'll help us to survive and thrive given the challenges in our ecosystems and then in our social structures. And it's also important that as I share these stories and images, the other thing that I could be doing is actually sharing with you lots of charts and data. But as we all know, in climate communications, data doesn't change people. People change people. It's the communities that we belong to and the stories we tell and the relationships we build that give us the real ability to change people. And that's what we want to do. We all together want to change and adapt like every normal process within the ecosystem. It's about changing and adapting. So I want to present that we have three primary problems in our age of the Anthropocene. We have non-sustainability or non-regenerative living. We have inequity issues, injustices, and that includes between generations. And then we have anami, which is a term that's referring to the meaninglessness. And just to hit that last one first, we have a world where human beings have, as we know from cultural anthropology, and from biology, that human beings have always worked together as a species, as Homo sapiens sapiens. We've always worked together to form small family groups or extended community groups. And we evolved the ability to form slightly larger groups where we could even have strangers come together and work collaboratively in small communities, particularly as they're finding ways to do farming and animal husbandry and other types of things that help them to survive in an environment that wasn't always friendly. And built into that is a normal understanding within human cultures from earliest times that that's what gave us meaning. It was actually the working together, the celebrating, the cycles of the seasons, the cycles of the year, depending on which ecosystem people lived in on the planet Earth. And it was just the normal living, the day-to-day living of growing things and of eating, of finding people to love and raising children, and then you put it as people die to celebrate their lives and to send them on and to take those stories, to pass those on, the stories of survival and of thriving and of goodness. And we're in essence hardwired as very simple people. We're essentially gardeners as a species. And the natural meaningfulness of life was built into that lifestyle. But as we became more sophisticated in some ways, and as time went on, we really developed this type of complex society that took away this natural meaning. And so we're finding today that kids particularly, but a lot of us are really struggling with this sense of meaning. And so it's a real crisis today as we're trying to figure out what that means for us. The second one is the non-sustainability and just this whole effort of working with environmental issues at the local level, but also climate change issues. We've got to find a way to live sustainably. And let me push it a little further, is that not only sustainably, but regeneratively. Sustainable would be that we get to the point where we're doing no damage. And that's really inspiring, and we're still not there yet. But and many of you know this concept of regenerative living, and so the regenerative approach takes it to the next step further, which is really not just preventing, or getting to zero damage, but doing what all other species do to contribute toward life on the planet Earth, which is a regenerative approach. We give back. If you imagine a team where it was a sustainable team versus a regenerative team, you get on this the sports team and you have one player who says, well, look, I'm not going to harm the team at all. I'm just not going to do anything to help it at all. No member of the team would actually stay for very long living that kind of lifestyle. And yet Homo sapiens have figured out a way to actually live on the planet and actually harm the team. And now the movement towards sustainability gets us to the point of saying, well, we're at least not going to harm the Earth. And those who've taken the next step truly is probably the way that we were hardwired, is really to give back, that all that we take from the Earth, we play an ecological niche role of really being able to give back. And that's that regenerative mind. And that story of regenerative is really, really critical for what we do. What I would suggest is we have some gloom. We have the math of carbon emissions, and that's really bleak. And almost every week, because this is my job, I have to look at those. We look at the statistics, we connect the dots. The remaining carbon budget that is out there it is not pretty, in that we're going to be extracting and burning, utilizing fossil fuels. That's the plan and the strategy over the next several decades. But very quickly, we are using up our carbon budget, the maximum amount that we can put into the atmosphere that will allow us to keep it at 1.5 or possibly 2.0 at maximum. And our projections are going beyond that. Even if we meet all of the targets of the Paris Agreement, it is not going to help us to keep at 1.5 degrees. And even if we met those, but what we're finding out is we're not even meeting those targets. So there's some gloom in there, and we don't want to gloss that over. We've got to figure out how to do this. That's the bleak part. That's the depressing part. That's the gloom of it. That said, we have some bloom. And the bloom is that we have science and social science now that tells us what we need in order to make that transition. The challenge with that democracy experiment is if we're assuming that that transition toward a sustainable and regenerative Earth, one that is adaptive to climate change, that allows us to survive and thrive in that world, if we're thinking that we're going to hold on to a late 20th century world and everything's going to be kept exactly as it is, it is not hopeful to think that that's the world that we're going to be able to preserve. Nobody has done the plan that's going to allow us to do that. However, if what we say is the democracy experiment is not finished, we probably don't want to hold on to that world so tightly. That world is the one that gave us the environmental crises that we're in right now in so many ways, biodiversity loss and the collapse of ecosystems and the loss of species and all kinds of other things that are just, major issues. That's not the world that we want to preserve, that kind of thinking, those kinds of stories, those kinds of behaviors. What we want to do is we want to get to this regenerative world that is regenerative because we found ways of living in right relationship with the earth, but also in right relationship with one another. As Homo sapiens, our real gift as a species is our ability to cooperate. We have a deeply embedded gene set for collaboration. Keep in mind, we also have one that is a gene set for independent thinking and somewhat selfish gene, and it's about hierarchy and creating alpha hierarchies. But at the same time, we evolved a beta collaborative gene, and it allows us to work together with people and not to compete with them, but to really work in cooperation. And that's what we have to activate. And it's stories and it's relationships and it's key people that are already doing it and that are already showing how positive this can be, that will be the bloom of our strategies. Let's share with you a couple of images really quickly, that are, I think, really important for us to think about here. Let me see if I can do my screen share and if you all can see this here. Okay. So one is, I just want to present this image of a tree, and we all know that the world is politically polarized right now. It does happen in communities from time to time throughout history. But if you imagine that we have conservative and progressive elements in our society that many societies do, and historically we know we've found, and if you think of them working together in a community, we actually need to have conservative elements and we need to have progressive elements. And if you imagine the conservative element being the trunk of the tree, it is stable and strong and is there day in, day out, season after season, time on it. It provides the stability that is needed. It provides the fundamental functions that society needs, and it holds on to those. It doesn't change very much, but it's very strong, facing a lot of the change and turmoil in an ecosystem. And yet that tree doesn't live alone. So if you imagine these branches being the progressive units, any amount of change that happens to that tree to adapt to an ecosystem that's changing is going to happen because it's able to produce seeds and fruit. And it's through those seeds, slight changes in those seeds allow that seed to drop into ground and grow a tree that is slightly different and perhaps slightly better, that can adapt and live better. And it's that innovation that comes off, and it needs to happen. Otherwise, if that tree does not change, it will die as the ecosystems and the global biosphere changes. That will die. And it's not just the tree itself. It's not just those progressive elements of change, nor the conservative elements of that trunk. But if you look, there's also some deep roots. And through those roots, we've learned the science that those roots allow that tree to connect to everything else in that forest. It's to all the other trees and the other species of trees and the other species within that soil that allows it to communicate and take in nutrients and give out in a regenerative way. And so we think of that as our elders in society that have lived long enough. They've been through the world, and they've experienced these stories that they've taken in and given out stories, and they've seen a lot, and they've learned what's important to live for and what's important to die for. And they pass on that knowledge not only to those other two elements within society, but also to the other trees. And I would suggest that might be a good model for us in our world where a democracy is not finished, that we pull the best of what conservative communities have been able to give us, the strength and the sturdiness and the stability in tremendous environmental challenges and change and destruction, wars and other kinds of things, and yet the ability of the progressive elements within society to allow change, long-term change to come when it's needed. And then we have the wisdom of the elders that teach the generations how to work together and how to work together in the bigger picture of that ecosystem of the forest. I want to share with you also another image that we'll use here. Oh, it looks like my images. Give me a second here. And another image about democracy, you know, in the American democracy was created in a world where we had a hierarchical system of kingship under England, and we took that pyramid and we tore it down and created democracy. But we always have these forces that are trying to get us back to people living at the bottom of that hierarchy, the 99%, tending to give their power and all that they earn toward the top. And that's not what democracy is about, of course. And when we try to make that human community stay still, and the whole purpose of it is to purchase so that we can create wealth for folks at the top and power at the top, that really does not fulfill our American democracy experiment. So I would suggest what we're trying to do is take that pyramid and flip it over. And if you see over here on the right, nature has hierarchies. We have leaders, and those are good, but democratic systems or natural systems that we have, which should be, you know, reflective of one another. We take that pyramid, we can flip it over, and as we're navigating to the right, you can imagine this is moving into a world of constant change and adaptation. What all nature does, we have a natural hierarchy that allows leadership in which directions to go. And if that leadership fails and it can no longer provide leadership, that leadership comes back down and becomes part of the community, and other leaders rise to the occasion. Situational leadership, servant leadership, and that leadership serves the community. And you can see there's a circle around it because it's all collaborative. We work together as a community, and that's really what that the social science shows us. And the science shows us we mimic nature. We're designed out of nature, and our brain hierarchy here, our brain network is designed to kind of mimic this. And I would suggest that that is part of our democratic experiment. I'm going to stop my share here, and let me just get to some kind of real practical pieces here. You know, we have this opportunity to do intergeneration sustainability. And what that means is our opportunity to work with the next generation as a bridge generation, all of us together, our elders, our folks who are in the prime of their career paths and the work that we're doing in the community, and then our young people who are just emerging, and the opportunity to work together to collaborate, to come up with some solutions. And there's a tremendous bloom of that, there's tremendous hope of that pathway. And it requires us to get the story right. And I would suggest that in replacing of Homo economicus, you may have not have heard, but a new way to think of this is as a human being serving as Homo habitatus, where we figure out the right relationship between the earth and people and the other people that are in our lives. And we find ways of bringing people and other people together to work collaboratively all together through multiple generations to move us toward regenerative living and resilient living in a climate threatened world. Particularly for CACs, some of the practical things we can do is really focusing on engaging young people and bringing together people from both sides of the political aisle. The opportunity to bring the strength of conservative traditions and progressive traditions together to have a common cause, and to really have not just seniors who retire and move to Florida, but having them stay in communities and having a new purpose that brings meaning, and the meaning of working together to solve some of these problems of climate change. And we do have the capacity to do this together. We have this term we call ultra sociality. It's that tremendous capacity that the human species has for sometimes putting our selfish drives on the side, really to benefit the entire group. And that by benefiting the entire group, the entire community, the entire society, we can actually survive better and ensure a better future for our children and our grandchildren. And part of the thing that way that we can do that is by creating parallel systems. And those parallel systems really mean the ability to look at systems and structures and practices that have not worked in the past to be regenerative and have not addressed those three crises I identified just a few minutes ago. But we create parallel systems where, for example, we're working with young people and empower them to be co-leaders with us. We're engaging our seniors not to leave the community, but to take their wisdom and their experience and knowledge and to provide that leadership for those of us who are still trying to find our way, and particularly for young people. To educate everybody, but in this new world of the 21st century of this image of Homo habitatus, who's in right relationship with the earth and bringing people together in right relationship with one another in this democratic experiment. We can apprentice young people and give them the skills, sustainability skills and regenerative thinking skills. Everybody should know how to garden and grow food and process food, reskilling for just general outdoor skills that everybody's going to need, even as homeowners. But it's also the social and community skills, our civic skills of getting involved, making our voices heard, coming together, creating new systems of parallel systems of networks of people, of informal homesteaders, whether it's urban, rural, or suburban, and finding ways to do best practices and sharing that with one another. We're creating the better, and that's what democracy really empowers us to do. There's some, concrete actions and projects that there are other communities and other networks that have already figured this out. And by reaching out to them and bringing best practices into our communities and sharing those and making sure that we have systems for sharing that knowledge, new knowledge and information, that's going to be really critical. Youth corps are a great tool for us to engage young people in. It gives them jobs, trains them for the future, and we can engage them in climate change issues. In the strategic planning that we can come together and do and figure out visions for our communities that are bottom-up visions that include everybody. And we try to bring as many people to the table as possible. And then we set up systems for conflict resolution when we have people who, because of different stories or different backgrounds or different beliefs or different political ideologies, they find it difficult to rise to the occasion and find a common vision. This conflict resolution allows us to agree, to disagree agreeably, and to find ways where we at least tolerate and respect that people see things from different perspectives. And I think certainly intergenerational mentorships, but really getting parents and grandparents to take responsibility as the mentors in society, to take responsibility for the future of their kids and to envision that, and then what we need to do today that will actually create that world. And so I present to you the last thing is really that democracy is not finished, and it's the finishing of democracy that's going to allow us, it's going to give us the hope, and it's going to give us the bloom for the future. We take the world that we've got it, and we can actually, grow things in this world. We can grow new networks and new relationships, and particularly a new generation of people who are living as Homo habitatus, not Homo economicus. And young people can get opportunities to lead when the leaders that we have today are not going to be effective. And that's part of finishing this democracy story. And we bring people from different perspectives and different traditions and different knowledge, and we add that to the table because there's always good ideas and great ideas that are coming from other cultures that we just don't have, and bringing those to the table, and we share the best ideas because they're just the best ideas. And I know that I wanted to end with that, the democracy is not finished, but then to give you also some time to ask any questions or to introduce any comments, and maybe bring dialogue. So, and I'm going to need some help, I think, for identifying those questions. So if there's somebody, one of the panelists can actually bring some of those questions up, that would be great.
So I'm here, and we have one question so far. From Leola, is there a recording of Rob Breen's talk? I want to play it over and over again. Also, I can't seem to copy and paste the description of the talk that's in the chat. I like to copy and paste that and text into my notes. I don't know how to Well, you can share the chat. I mean, you can save the chat, Leola and everybody, and with the three little dots at the bottom right-hand corner, and you click, and it brings you, it saves the entire chat in a text edit that you can then copy and paste. But I don't know if, yes, so thank you, Rob. That was wonderful. And I myself have tons of questions, but I don't want to take moderator's privilege and be the first one to ask. So is there anybody in the audience who has another question in the Q&A?
Just to note that the talk, the Zoom recording of the talk will be in our resource library on this site, which by the way, the site will continue to be open for people to use for research in the library and the exhibitor nonprofit area. But we're also going to be posting a link to this the presentation, which was really wonderful, on the NYSACC.org website. But that may not be up on there for a couple of weeks, but it'll be in the resource library within a day or two.
Thank you. And if anybody doesn't know how to get to the resource library in Gather, it's a room down to the lower right of the lobby. But I imagine that we'll be sending out links to the resource library, which is basically our Google Drive, where we are compiling everything. And we'll be sending that out to all registrants. And somebody's saying you can't see the little dots at the very bottom where it says, at the bottom of the chat, where it says type your message
next
here.
to the smiley face, right
Next
right
to the
next
smiley face. Do you
Yep.
see the dots, or is it only the panelists that see the dots?
But we'll also be saving all the chat comments, and that'll
Right.
be in a document in the resource library and on the website.
Okay. All right. So we'll save the chat and
And also there's Rob's email is in the chat,
right.
and of course the websites that he's been referring to.
Okay.
So do we have some content related questions?
Not that I'm seeing.
From boards.
Oh, okay, boards too. I feel somewhat optimistic about our ability to overcome climate change. Willpower and technology along with awareness, willpower and technology along with awareness might get us where we need to be. I'm more depressed about the massive die-off of plant and animal species. What do we do to raise the awareness of the Anthropocene?
I'd say my response to that is I also have real doubts about technological solutions, and I'm not an anti-tech person. I really believe that technology can be very, very good, but it has to be, it can't be frivolous technology, and it can't be technology that is used to just solve one linear problem, but create lots of other external problems. And that's the challenge with technology. So I think that more of what we're going to have to, and they're also very, very expensive. It takes years to do the development of these technologies. And very often we rely on these technologies to solve our problems rather than looking at human behavior and what really needs to change, because it's much more simple to come up with a technological solution. But that said, the money that we're going to have to come up with technological solutions, I don't know where that's coming from. We have so many crises under climate change that are, if you just look at our economy, we know where our money is going to go. And so I think that social solutions are going to be at the forefront. And there are lots of organizations right now that are coming up with ways that we can talk about behavior change that is very life-giving and regenerative. People want to have meaningful lives. They want to connect. They want to be intimate with their children, with their significant others, with their community members, and we just don't have time. And there's a book that came out several years ago about bowling alone that was really talking about this kind of isolation that we have. And I think that this democracy experiment was really about people and communities working together with very diverse people that they oftentimes disagreed with, and finding these social solutions are going to be the real key for us. And they're inexpensive. It just requires people coming together, and there's some norms-based research on this of how this happens. It's educating, but also setting good examples and people joining groups and that they feel like they belong to and that give meaning to them. And those social technologies really are out there. The social solutions are really out there. And I think that's going to be the key.
Thank you. Our next question is from Roberta C. While this seems very sad, there is a clear direction here that everyone is too overwhelmed to respond. Is this paralysis that we need to overcome?
Absolutely. There is, there's paralysis on the level both of too much information overloading our brains to come up with the exact precise answer. And then also the paralysis of there's just too much negativity. There's just too much gloom in there that doesn't activate people to do stuff. But as soon as we grab a group of young people and say, what we're going to do is we're going to do some carbon farming. Let's get out there next Saturday, 3 hours. I'll bring the tools and gloves. You bring your water bottles, and let's just start doing this. And the amount of energy and positive, vibes that come out of that are transformative. And we are designed for that. You think about all the people throughout generations that have lived under tremendously oppressive empires and oppressive regimes. And it was so depressing and bleak. And yet those empires have all collapsed and people have actually moved on to different systems of organizing. And we have so many democracies that are out today, not perfect democracies, but much better than what we lived under before. And you can imagine what needed to happen with those to transform their behaviors and their attitudes that gave hope. So I tend to maintain the hope. And those people who are feeling hopeless and not motivated, that's why they need to have hope-filled mentors. Anybody else who's out there, young people or seniors who do have this, that's the greatest gift you can offer people, is the meaning that ends their meaninglessness, and just do something that is positive. And that's the first step that will transform people.
And I wanted to just comment and sort of ask a question related to that, Rob. So I've read that a play that the human species, the human brain is made more open to change through play. That play activates the part of the brain that is able to learn and change, and it reduces the activity of the brain that is paralyzed by fear and othering the non-tribe. So with the perspective of play, can you say anything about your Game Quest game, or Earth Quest game, I should say?
Yeah, actually, that's good, excellent point that you bring up. And it's really about play, and that human beings actually are designed. There are actually a few other species we've looked at that actually do play. And remember, what play is and games is, it's really our practice for the real world. It gives us the opportunity to practice living skills and working together and all kinds of things. And every culture that we know of throughout history has found ways to do formalized play, particularly through games and athletic experiences. They weren't just to farm kids off so they have some activity to keep them out of trouble. It was really the games that prepared them for the skills and the cooperation, collaboration, kept them fit certainly, but prepared them for the experience of the world. Chess is a great example of preparing people for the strategies of how to defend yourself. But absolutely, we know that we're hardwired for play and for games, because it allows us to take an image, a very, very complex image of the world, which has so many pieces, and our brain can't handle that. And we simplify it and make some very simple rules that will guide our behavior. And so by doing play, it allows us to be creative with those responses, and allows us to practice things that, if we're doing something right now, but we in a game practice something different that actually works, there's a real tendency for people to be able to take that game and play activity and actually begin to do that in real life. And so there's a connection of behavior change that's in there. So we actually, under those principles and under that research, we designed EarthQuest to do that. So it uses simulation experiences. So we look at what the future anticipated experiences or narratives of climate change are going to look like, and probabilities or possibilities of how that's going to transform the world. And then in EarthQuest, players meet face to face. This is not a computer game. This takes advantage of all the things we know from social science. It's about people transforming people. So they come together as a team, and they work together through role playing the role of their child or grandchild in the near future, so in about 2070 or so. And they address the problems of unfolding climate change. It's very hard for us to see right now. in our world, but in the game, it becomes very real for them. And so as they can look at these impacts of climate change and environmental degradation, kind of these legacy issues that they'll have in future generations from the decisions we make today, it allows them to really understand and see and visualize, because we use multimedia to support this. But they can begin to grapple with that, what that looks like, and take it on and play it. And if they imagine it, the brain doesn't often know the difference between very seriously imagined behavior or images and what we experience in reality. So by using our imagination to picture what the world looks like, it really allows young people to experience kind of emotionally what that world looks like, and the positive stuff of what people are doing in the game. So we use that and the social science on games and play as a way to really prepare them for the skills that they'll need to learn in the world that they need to look at, and what we can do today for solutions working together.
Great, thank you. I want to acknowledge that it's 3:03 and some people may need to leave, but I think if you're willing, Rob, we could stay around and answer a couple more questions.
We can do that. I'll be willing to stay.
Great, thanks. So Steve Covey, how do we get successful outcomes or even motivate mass movements for social solutions when there is still so much resistance to anything that resembles a progressive approach to handling climate change?
Well, first of all, as far as the mass movement goes, I am not in a position as a cultural leader and a cultural elite to create mass movements. And so so the thing is that I always recognize is every single person has some amount of power. And I say power, it's really the ability to attract people to work together, and to empower people, and and to bring people together to do things and inspire them. And so we all have different levels of that. And if what your primary role of doing that is as a parent, then your responsibility is to use your power in your family and get your kids and your spouse, your significant other mobilized, or your extended family, if you have credibility. And that's the level of power you've got. I have a little bit more ability to use that when I'm at DEC, a little more influence because of my position. And so my responsibility is to work with local communities to get them to move forward on climate change initiatives, but to reach out to human beings, establish those relationships, say, let's do this together. Every network that I'm on, I have an opportunity to influence with that, and we form that together. And I'm always willing to tell my story, not in the humble brag sense, but of the best practices of what we can do in our 5 to 9s in addition to our 9 to 5 work. And so I think that the thing is, the mass movement's going to happen, and it always has happened because some people figured out a better way and did this parallel system of creating, networks of neighbors and of families coming together and giving the example and inviting others to be part of that. And that just spreads. Everything we look at with marketing even shows that when key people begin to take on a product, buy a product, it catches on if it's something that actually solves people's needs, or whether it's ego needs or status needs or real practical needs. People will take a good idea, take it on, and then soon a whole lot of people are doing it. And we can do the same thing with movements. So I think at this level, I'm not so sure how many massive national or international level elites we have on the call today, and I would guess probably none. But at our local level with CACs, people do have enough relationships where we can bring people together and do something significant. And that massive movement might be that we mobilize might happen in our community. But then the neighboring community looks at our community and says, wow, when climate change hit and they got flooding and they got, other kinds of disasters, they were ready and the people mobilized and they helped each other and they did all kinds of great things. Why can't our community be like that? Well, they can. And a phone call happens and they organize a team, and then soon it's 2 communities, and then 6 communities, and then 23 communities. And I do think in the Hudson Valley in New York, we're very blessed to have communities that back in the 1970s started, an earth care movement, and it spread. And CAC started as just a couple, and it spread. So I think that we have the answer in front of us. It's people that change people, and we just need enough people who have that vision in their own, their own level of power to begin to reach out and form those relationships and create the vision and the activities that will engage people and give people meaning. I hope that kind of answers the question, at least as a direction in there.
Thank you. Thank you. 2 more questions. MJ asks, is it really that we have become more sophisticated, or what we have invested our attention to has shifted. We are much more technologically astute now, yet natural system ignorant, while in the past, the knowledge of their natural world was deep, profound, and from my perspective, sophisticated.
I probably should have used a better word than sophisticated, and probably our definition of sophisticated, probably some level of complexity is probably a better term for that. Complex doesn't always mean better. However, nature complexifies through a system in order to solve problems. And that's just a natural process. And so if we just look at the natural process of human beings working together in more complex society, it can be a solution to environmental problems that we have, or survival problems of food and water and shelter and so forth. However, there can be complexity that is frivolous complexity, that we don't need it, or we're getting so complex, it has nothing to do with helping us to survive. It has more to maybe maximizing profit levels at some level, or some level of complexity for the sake of complexity, because it's neat or attractive or cool. And that's not the level of sophistication I would talk about. So I think understanding complexity, the natural complexity that helps us to survive, and interconnectedness of any food web is the kind of complexity that would be positive, and there's a complexity that would just be destructive.
Thank you. Roberta C. asks, there is so much focus on our individual behavior. Can we talk about corporate responsibility, capitalism, and how to create the major adjustment that is needed?
Oh, I love that question. That's fantastic. And that was part of the assumption of, and I use the term, homo economicus, because that homo economicus is the model that we use in economics for understanding human behavior. And the assumption is it is an individual concerned about self-preservation and self-motivation, and is individualistic and selfish. And that's the model that we use in making environmental policy, in economic policy and economic decision making. And it's one that guides the market, that there really is no community or no common good, because it's really just a collection of individuals in relationships of meeting their own individual selfish needs. And that's part of the story. That is there. We know that there is a gene set that's for that. However, the later gene set that we evolved was the the ultra social gene, and that was the ability to collaborate and the ability to set aside personal achievement or personal self-interest for the greater cause of the community, of the family. By the way, if parents don't figure out how to do this, we have some real problems with children and families. But absolutely, I think one of the keys to our being able to talk about the bloom and the positive and the hope of this is really activating that ultra social gene of collaboration, of us saying, look, my life is not about me getting the most toys and cookies by the end of my life, and advancing technology for the sake of frivolous technology. But it's really about looking at what we need to do in a world that's rapidly changing, and how we maybe simplify our lives, because there's some complexity we just don't need that distracts us. And that's why I offered the idea of Homo habitatus, and the assumptions of that are we're very much focused on the common good, and we're part of groups, and we're part of a community, and that we work collaboratively together, and that we have leadership that is serving the entire community, and we do have a common good, and that we sometimes will self-sacrifice or use altruistic behavior to benefit the group. And then that group itself survives and thrives into the future and passes on all that's good as kind of a toolbox or set of toolboxes that help us to navigate our future. So I do agree that hyper-individualism, the bowling alone, is not going to be the solution or the set of solutions for us. Each competing against each other, we will all lose in that situation. But because we can use our biology, our adaptive biology of this collaborative behavior, the beta collaborative behavior, that is going to be the key that allows us to put the common good of our children, their grandchildren, and one another today as the highest priority, and then we're contributing toward a common good. That is going to be the key.
And going back to, thank you, and going back to your mention of the story and relationships, I have heard stories of corporate CEOs having had a change of heart and being transformed by a conversation with somebody. And I'm hoping that's not apocryphal, but
No, I do, and that's my comment early on. It's, data doesn't change people; it's people that change people. I love the story of Barry Goldwater, who was, in a very classic, traditional, conservative lifestyle and culture. And as a public servant, as a senator of Arizona, he had, kind of the classic, kind of check boxes of what made him conservative, and his political views followed alongside that. And his political views followed alongside that. And he was very adamantly against equal rights for all different kinds of people, including homosexuals, in his life. And then Barry Water had a grandson that he loved more than the life itself. And he fell in love with his grandchild, and his grandchild, as he grew older, came out and said, "Grandpa, I want to let you know, I know that you politically don't agree with this, and because of your value system, you don't agree with this, but I'm gay, and I want to let you know I love you very much, and I've been afraid to tell you, but I want to tell you this." And Barry Goldwater's heart melted, and he had a lot of processing to do. And at some point, he came to the conclusion that nature always produces some amount of species that have homosexuality reflected in them. He accepted that as a scientific fact, and he found a way to navigate a political worldview that was very transformed to his earlier view, that included something that he wasn't comfortable with initially. And that was out of love and transformation of human relationships that changed his way of seeing the world. And probably as an elder became a bigger and more tolerant and more accepting and certainly more loving. So I do have hope for all kinds of people. That when we encounter the other in life, the other is not enemy, but the other is just, an invitation to learn and to grow that the whole world needs, because we're full of very diverse people and ideas. And it's going to take all of those as solutions in the future.
I love that. Thank you. I think this will be our last question. Intuzer, whoever that is, asks, when I think of baby steps in my town, for example, for town crews to change to electric leaf blowers and stop idling trucks, stop using herbicides on town property, I think there will be crazy opposition to even those things. I'd sure like advice on approaching these topics.
I don't know that we're going to have time to cover that in full, but what I would invite is there are lots and lots of communities that have gone through the exact same thing, and they did come up with strategies for doing this. And I think that part of that is actually about messaging. It's not that people reject change, and this is just what the social science says. It's not that we reject change, it's we reject being changed. And sometimes we present these opportunities for change as in language or in ways that say that my group has the idea and the truth and your group doesn't. And if you don't change, then you are not valuable or valid in our community. And I think we have to be very careful about how we communicate. If what we communicate is we identify what the other side is, the people who we want to invite to change, and we find out what they value and what their stories are and what they believe in and what's important to them. And we're able to take the change that we're thinking about and we put it in terms that's valuable to them, whether it's because they can save money or because this is more efficient or because it doesn't make stinky air that all of us have to breathe and cause lung cancer. People, no matter where they are on the political spectrum, tend to love their children, they love their health, and in America, we find they love the earth. And so we find 3 different ways that might connect with them. And we change the way that we communicate and invite them to be part of this for different reasons than we're changing. And that's some of the direction that we need to do in order to move forward on that.
Thank you. I love that. And, it reminds me of the principles of nonviolent communication.
Absolutely.
Finding out what the other person's needs are or the other group's needs are and taking it from there.
Fantastic. Thank you.
So we are at 3:17. I think it's time to wrap this up. I want to thank you so much, Rob, for your wonderful talk, which I also will want to listen to over and over again. Again, for those of you who are in the audience and who might want to ask their friends and neighbors to view it. The link to this recording will be in our resource library sometime soon.
Okay.
Um,
And thank
and
you so much for having me and inviting me. The honor is absolutely mine.
and I look forward to reading more about your work.
Thank you.
So John, Haven, Dean, if anybody else wants to chime in here. Rob, Haven had to boot you off of the Gather platform because
Okay.
of your background noise.
I
So
see.
I don't think we'll be seeing you back there. Although I guess if you wanted to, you could rejoin.
You
Okay.
could.
So
Thank you so much, Rob. It was really an inspiring talk and a fitting conclusion to this conference, which was really all about communication and collaboration. So
Good. I'm glad to be here. Thank
that's
you.
all.
I agree. I mean, I want to just echo what John just so eloquently said. This is purpose for this work, that we all can collaborate and work together to raise high the roof beam. And your speech was truly inspiring, and I plan to re-listen to it. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
So we'll see everybody back on Gather, or maybe down in Yonkers tomorrow for a beer. Who knows?
Okay, fair enough. Bye-bye.
bye-bye.